Hello story lovers, and welcome back to my channel, Tales with Tasha. I am Tasha and I am a storyteller. I love weaving enchanting tales that I hope you will enjoy as much as I do. It's my birthday tomorrow, and to celebrate I have a longer fantasy story for you today, inspired by my favourite Christmas fictional story, Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. The story is divided into 3 chapters, and the timestamps are listed in the description, so they are easy to find. If you love stories full of fantasy and science fiction, or terrifying tales, the occasional side of romance and lots more, this is the channel for you. We post stories of approximately 100 words as shorts during the week, and one longer story every Friday with different genres each week. Let me know in the comments your favourite genre so we can be sure to have you covered. Please subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the exciting stories, and also smash that like button if you enjoy the tale. Thank you, lovelies. This story is suitable for all, given that it's based on a classic and is no more haunting than the original. Stay to the end for cute cats. With that being said, make sure you are sitting comfortably, and let's jump right on in. Merry Midwinter, The Magic of the Season, Chapter 1, by Natasha Duncan Drake. The whole world has magic, but no place is more magical than the great forest of Lon, for it is the realm of the fairies. Even in the midst of winter, the trees sparkle with ice crystals, and the snow glints in the bright sunlight. At least, this is true now. But once, there was a place in the forest, with no sparkling and no glinting. The trees hung heavy with dull icicles, and the snow lay in grey lumps on the ground. This was the home of Abenzia. It was once the home of Abenzia and Marley, but fairies do not remain as corporeal beings forever. Marley had passed beyond the mortal plane 7 turnings of the year prior to our story's beginning, on the eve of the Midwinter Festival. Now, it is a fairy's job to care for their forest and those in it. Every being and creature is born with their own magic. Some with the ability to access it, others with it simply at their core. However, at times, a being might require more magic. It is a fairy's place to give them this magic. However, Abenzia was not a good and kind fairy. She would only lend such magic. And, unthinkable to most, she demanded the high price of some of the borrower's internal magic as payment for the loan, as well as the traditional tribute of a small offering of food or drink. This magic she hoarded in great crystals, so only she could feel its life and see its sparkle. Not all fairies are beautiful as a human would reckon it, but most are beautiful in their own way. Abenzia had a most fair face, but she was the least beautiful of them all. There was barely a moment when her face was not marred by a scowl, and her eyes were not black with greed. The sun did not warm her, the snow did not chill her, nothing of nature seemed to touch her at all, and that was the way Abenzia liked it. The only time she smiled was when more magic came to her, not caring a whit for the suffering of those around her. Some would say the one who suffered the most was her long-serving assistant, Cratchit. A pixie of the kindest nature, Cratchit could only watch as his mistress disregarded the care of those around her. It was common in those times for the fairy of the district to have a place where those who required their services might come and visit them. Abenzia had such a place, in the hollow of what had once been a great oak, but had long since given in to advanced age. It was divided in two, the large portion being Ebenzia's, where she kept her crystals behind a dark screen and sat behind an imposing desk to detail who had asked her for what and when, and of course her favourite, who had not repaid their debt. The smaller part, with a tiny desk and the door to the rest of the forest, was where Cratchit worked. At the beginning of our tale, Cratchit was at his desk, copying letters, for even fairies must talk to other fairies. Ebenzia had the door between their two sides open, for she was not looking at her magic, and wished instead to keep an eye on Cratchit. A glowstone sat next to Cratchit's desk, barely pink as it gave off little warmth. Wrapped in many layers, Cratchit used it to try and thaw his fingers as he worked. "Merry midwinter, Aunt Ebenzia, Cratchit!" Such a cheerful voice made Cratchit sit up and smile as the owner swept past him. It was Freddie, Ebenzia's nephew, and a nicer fairy Cratchit had never met. "Bah, humbug," Ebenzia said, scowling. "What have you to be merry about? You've no magic to speak of." "Then, Aunt," Freddie replied with a bright smile, "what have you to be so dismal about? You have magic enough for us all." Ebenzia scowled some more. "I'll be how I wish," she said, "while I see such fools as you. Merry midwinter indeed. What is midwinter festival but a time to squander magic? Fools waste what they do not have to make snow white and ice sparkle, to make stones glow colours and trees weave their branches. If I had my way, every idiot who goes around with merry midwinter on their lips should be boiled with their own honey and sent to the next life with an evergreen bough through their heart." "Aunt!" pleaded her shocked nephew. "Nephew," was Ebenzia's cold reply. "Keep merry midwinter in your own way, and let me keep it in mine." "But you don't keep it." "Let me leave it alone then," said Ebenzia. "Much good it has ever done you." "Ah, but Aunt, it has done me good, though it has given me no magic," Freddie replied. "Midwinter festival is a time of good cheer, to bring happiness, forgiveness, and joy. It brings together families, and puts goodwill in hearts that, through the rest of the year, do not always feel it. Though it has not given me the tiniest bit of magic, it has gladdened my soul. I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say, Goddess bless it." Cratchit applauded with all the delight of one caught up in the orator's speech. However, realizing his mistake, he immediately went back to his glowstone, tapping it hopefully and watching it lose yet more radiance. "Another sound from you," Ebenzia growled, "and you'll keep midwinter by losing your position." "Please, Aunt, don't be angry, especially at Cratchit. Dine with us tomorrow." "No, good afternoon." "I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon." "I am sorry to find you of such bad humour, Aunt," Freddie said. "No matter, I must follow my heart. So merry midwinter, Aunt. Good afternoon, and may the new year bring you joy and happiness. Good afternoon." Freddie left with a merry midwinter on his way out to Cratchit, who replied in kind, although quietly. Ebenzia sneered at their discourse, muttering about the level of their intelligence. She was even less well pleased when, on leaving, Freddie allowed two others to enter. One was a rather rotund faun, the other a willowy-looking dryad in a bulky winter coat. "Is this the gathering place of Ebenzia and Marley?" the dryad asked. "Have I the pleasure of addressing the majestic Ebenza or Marley?" Marley met her star time 7 years to this day, Abenzia replied. Ah, then we are sorry to bring up such tearful memories, the faun apologized. Abenzia just shrugged. She had liked Marley, they had been two of a kind, but she did not mourn. At this festive time of year, majestic Abenzia, the Dryad said, using the old forms, it is more than usually desired that we should make some slight provisions for those not as fortunate as ourselves, those who are likely seeing their last midwinter as their magic wanes. We are collecting magical donations so that they might have the strength to enjoy one last festival. What shall I put you down for? Nothing. You wish to be anonymous? I wish to be left alone, Abenzia said. If they are going to die, they should get on and do it and decrease the surplus population. Cratchit cringed on behalf of the poor beings whose shock was palpable. They left quickly the way they had come, the sound of distant singing sounding through the door as they went through it. Cratchit went back to work until there was the light tingling of bells as day slipped into evening. Tomorrow, Abenzia said, as she closed her office door. Is Midwinter Festival, Cratchit said as forcefully as he dared. Abenzia scowled and tutted. Be in all the earlier the next day, she said, and swept out, muttering about the injustice of it all. Cratchit breathed a sigh of relief. Usually there was more of a diatribe, but he refused to work on the one day a year that was for family, no matter what. Abenzia walked home with her head held high, but refusing to see the festivities trying to go on around her. Those who saw her simply stepped out of her way. She lived in another giant oak, as her position deserved. Only this one was even darker and dingier than her gathering place. This tree had once been where Marley lived, but it was larger than Abenzia's place of habitation had been, so she had moved in once Marley passed over. It had a large door with a large brass knocker, a human affectation Marley had enjoyed. Abenzia had seen the knocker 1,000 times, but as she reached for the door handle, she looked at it again. As she did, it changed. From roaring lion, it shifted into a staring face, a face all too familiar. Marley gazed back at her, glowing like a dank mushroom. Then, between one blink and the next, it was gone and was a lion again. Humbug, Abenzia muttered under her breath, shaking her head and taking hold of the door handle. Inside, she waved a hand at the lamp beside the door, lighting it. Most beings in the forest used lightstones, but Abenzia liked the human way. It used much less magic. Picking up the lamp, she climbed the spiral staircase up to her rooms in the treehouse above. Everywhere there were shadows, but Abenzia gave them no thought. She lit the glowstone, making sure to not use too much magic, and sat close to it for warmth as she considered what she could do the following day. Too many imbeciles would be celebrating to make much worthwhile, but there might be a few she could frighten out of the idiocy of the season. It was as she was contemplating this that she heard a clanking sound. At first she thought it might be moronic merrymakers with bells, but as it came closer, she realized it was no instrument. There was a loud banging from the door below, and then more clanking, and the occasional thud. Abenzia could escape the truth no longer. Someone was coming up her stairs, someone carrying chains, and at least one other something heavy. There was no door at the top of the stairs, only a heavy curtain, and it ruffled, as if touched by a wind. At first she could see no more, but then a sickly glow began in the centre, a glow that formed into a hand with long, spindly fingers. The hand moved forward to reveal an arm wound in chain, and the arm was attached to a body, and the body to a head, a very familiar head. It was Marley. "I will not believe it," Abenzia said. Marley stood there, body wound in chain, dress the one Abenzia had last seen her wearing as her time came. On the chain were grey caricatures of the jewels they used to hold magic. "Who are you?" Abenzia asked eventually, unable to stand the sudden silence. "Asked me who I was. Who were you then?" "When I walked this mortal plane, I was your partner Marley," the apparition said. "You're not real." The thing looked at her then, dead, empty eyes staring at her. "You doubt your senses." "Yes," Abenzia replied. "For all I can tell, some idiot spilled fairy dust into my food. You are nothing more than indigestion." The spirit lifted its arms, shook its chains and wailed. Abenzia shied away, throwing her hands over her ears. "Mercy," she cried. "Believe in me," Marley demanded. I do, Abenzia promised, cowering. "Why do you trouble me, Marley?" "In a fairy's time on this plane, they are tasked with but one thing," the spirit told her. "To care for those under their charge and give magic to the poor souls who require it. For fairies who fail in this duty, there is no star waiting in which to rest, only the curse to walk among those whom they can no longer touch, no longer share with." "But the chain, Marley, why the chain?" "This chain is iron. I forged it link by link, yard by yard, and it binds my soul. I wore it in life by choice, and since my star time, because it can never be taken off," Marley told her. "You wore a chain like this 7 midwinters ago, and you have laboured on it diligently since." "It is a ponderous chain." Abenzia stared down at herself, but she could see nothing. "Speak comfort to me, Marley. I have none to give, no rest, no solace, only remorse." "But you always attended well to our business, Marley." "Our business?" Marley wailed, rattling her chains once more. "The folk of the forest were my business. The welfare of every creature was my business. Kindness, mercy, love, benevolence were all my business. Woe is me! Why did I not see? Why did I not touch? Why did I not give when this was my place?" Abenzia shied back as fake jewels clanked against iron. "Hear me!" "I will!" "I am here to warn you that you have yet a hope of escaping my fate, a chance I begged for you, Abenzia." "You were always a good friend to me." "You will be haunted by 3 spirits." The dread Abenzia was feeling grew. Magic was one thing, spirits of another realm an entirely different one. "I'd rather not." "Without them your hope is gone. No magic will save you. You will never see starlight, Abenzia, but walk this plane, unseen for eternity. Expect the first tomorrow, when the bells chime 1, the next when the bells chime 2, and the third at the chime of 3. Its message given, the spirit walked backwards towards the curtain once more, those staring eyes glaring forward, full of woe. When its sickly light finally vanished, Abenzia picked up her light and moved as quickly as she dared to her bedroom, even forgetting to put out the meagre glowstone. There she hid under her blankets and behind her curtains until sleep finally claimed her. Merry Midwinter, The Magic of the Season, Chapter 2, by Natasha Duncan Drake. When Abenzia woke, it was completely dark. She did not know what had woken her until there was the tiny tinkle of bells and a single chime. Bright, white light burst through the gap in the curtains on her bed, and she had to shield her eyes. Only as it slowly receded did she dare look. There, in her bedchamber, was a small, floating figure. It had no wings, but as the light dimmed more, Abenzia could see white hair floating around its head like a halo. She could not discern if it had a gender or an age, because as she looked it seemed to change. She cleared her throat as her voice failed. Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold to me? I am. The voice was soft, but it too changed even in such a short phrase, being no particular way for the whole thing. Who are you? I am the ghost of Midwinter's past, your past. I am here for your reclamation. Rise and walk with me. Abenzia did not know what good walking would do as the spirit led her from the bed, until her windows flung open wide. I am no longer young, she said. I cannot fly. I will not allow you to fall, was all the spirit said. Its grip was firm. Abenzia had no choice. Even so, she was shocked as she stepped over the windowsill to find herself floating in a way she had not done since her youth. They were also not outside her tree. In fact, they were no longer in lawn at all. As she looked around, Abenzia could not believe it at all. They were floating next to a beautiful castle. By the goddess herself, she said. I know this place. I was a child here. Even as she spoke, a horde of children burst out of the side door into the winter, some immediately taking to the air as young fairies are wont to do. Others, the fauns, pixies and more, picked up snow from the ground and began to throw it at those flying. Abenzia could not help the smile that grew on her face as she watched. The midwinter snowball fight, she whispered. A tradition every year, was it not? The spirit said, for all those going home for the festivities. Yes, Abenzia agreed, floating closer. Oh, there's Bebe and Jax. Jax, it's me, Abenzia. These are but shadows of what have been, the spirit said, tone as gentle as ever. They cannot hear you. And I spy one child who is not playing this year. Abenzia looked to the open double doors, knowing already what she would see. There she was in her proper dress, her face stony, the letter from her father still in her hand. She would not cry. Her father had a new wife and new duties. They would not be home for midwinter this year. It was only sensible to stay at school, Abenzia said. There would be no one at home. But couldn't you have joined your family where they were? It would have taken too much magic to get there in time, Abenzia defended her father, even as she remembered the sense of loss. And yet there were other years, other destinations, but still you remained, the spirit said. The holidays were a good time to study, Abenzia said. So you did not feel joy when this happened? The scene shifted. There was more snow this time, and it was beginning to get dark, long after the traditional snowball fight had finished. Looking out into the twilight was a much older version of her childhood self. Ibby! She turned as she heard the voice and watched as a smaller girl ran through the snow. Ibby! Oh, Ibby, I am so happy to see you! Franny! The child version of herself greeted, gathering the smaller girl into her arms. What are you doing here? I am to bring you home, Franny cried joyfully. Stepmother is so changed since she had little Jasmine that I was not afraid to ask, and when I did, she said you were to come home for always. For always? Franny nodded. She wishes to teach us both herself until we are old enough to find our own place in this world, she said. A delicate child. Yes, Abenzia agreed. She never flew. But such a big heart. Always. To the moment of her star time. She had a child herself, didn't she? Yes, my nephew Freddie. So like her. Abenzia did not reply. As far as she knew, Freddie was her only living relative. When her father had been killed in an accident, her stepmother had moved on to another being, and Abenzia had heard nothing of her or her daughter since. Let us see another place, the spirit said, turning, even while holding her hand, and they were somewhere new yet again. They were floating next to a high window looking into a sparkling hall. Come, the spirit said, and they floated through the glass. Inside was music and dancing and the sound of merrymaking. It's the maestro's house, Abenzia said, unable to keep the excitement and wonder from her voice. I learned the finer points of magic here, and there he is, the maestro himself, before he became the most twinkling star in the sky. Such gaiety! The maestro's midwinter party was famous through all his district, Abenzia said. Such a small matter. Small? Never small. But what did it cost? A sprinkle of magic here, a sprinkle of magic there to make so many people happy. Abenzia did not know what to say. Look, there you are, the spirit said, and pointed. To the side of the crowd, Abenzia saw herself, hanging back, unsure what to do. Then Marley came up beside her, grabbed her arm and dragged her into the dancing. Marley always was such a good friend to you. As the spirit spoke, the scene changed again. They were in Abenzia's gathering place. Only there were 2 desks in the large side, and a younger version of herself sat at the other one. Your partner lies with her last breath on her lips, and yet here you are at your desk. She did not want me there, Abenzia defended herself. You did not wish to be there, the spirit countered, and suddenly they were in Marley's bedchamber. Ibi, Ibi, Marley was whispering. I see, I see. No, take me away, Abenzia begged. I cannot bear it. You avoided it once, the spirit said. I cannot bear it, Abenzia said, turning on the spirit and dragging her hand away from its grasp. The spirit stood there, its white robes becoming brighter and brighter. I cannot, Abenzia cried, and threw magic at the thing. In a blink it was gone, and the room was dark. There was no Marley, no spirit, just her empty bed. As exhaustion flowed over her, Abenzia staggered to the bed and fell into it. Come in, and know me better, woman! A booming voice sent Abenzia shooting out of her slumber. She was standing before she had so much as realized she was awake. I'm waiting, came the voice again. It did not boom so much this time. Abenzia peered round her bedroom door, into the other room. She saw food and drink and sparkling gifts, and a large robe. She did not dare look up. I am the ghost of midwinter present, the new spirit announced. Look upon me. There was something in the voice, and she had no choice. What she looked into was a smiling face with kind, laughing eyes. Large horns curled round the spirit's head, along with curly hair and a full beard. He looked like he should be a satyr. But where there should have been lust, Abenzia could see only kindness. Spirit, take me where you will, she said, because she had learned there was no fighting this. Touch my robe, the spirit said, and she did as she was told. Suddenly it was no longer night, and Abenzia realized they were outside in one of the bustling merchant districts. As a young fawn ran by carrying a large bowl of fruit, the spirit reached out, and glitter fell from his hand onto the bowl. Merry midwinter, someone called, and another replied. Let us walk, the spirit invited. The place was noisy, but it was a joyful noise, and most faces were full of happiness and cheer. The merchant districts always opened on midwinter morning, for all to buy their fresh produce for the many feasts. Everyone was excited. As they passed stalls and people hurrying about their business, the spirit sprinkled his glitter on everything, only for it to melt away. Is that magic? Abenzia finally asked. Of a sort, the spirit replied. Does it make the food taste better? To any kindly given, the spirit said, and to a poor dinner the most. Suddenly they were no longer in the merchant district. They were beside a rickety-looking tree with a wonky structure in its branches. Abenzia was about to ask where they were when she heard singing. She turned to see her assistant Cratchit walking up the path with a small boy on his shoulders. It was the boy who was singing. His voice was high and reedy, but the joy of his singing touched even Abenzia's cold heart. As they drew level with the door, the boy sang one last happy note and stopped. Why, thank you, Tim, Cratchit said, and lifted the boy off his shoulders. That was a joy to my heart. No need for thanks, Dar, Tim said. It's midwinter. It was as Cratchit held his son steady for a moment as the boy swayed that Abenzia noticed the jewel hanging from a leather strap around Tim's throat. It glowed a little brighter for a moment, and then Tim smiled again, standing straighter and reaching for the door handle. Is that a magical stabilizer? The spirit said without her having to finish the question. Yes. I didn't know Cratchit had an ailing child. You never asked, the spirit said, and pulled her inside before she could object. What she saw as they stepped into the main room of the house made her heart brim. Of course she had known Cratchit had a family, but the spirit was right. She had never bothered to ask about it. There were 4 children, including Tim. And Cratchit's wife was just like him, a pixie of perfect proportions with a ready smile. All among the family were hugs and kisses. This looks like a feast fit for the goddess herself, Cratchit said as he surveyed the table. We all worked on it, Dar, Cratchit's older son said proudly. I would expect nothing less from my wonderful family, was Cratchit's reply. Abenzia did not think it looked like a feast at all. There was only just enough food to feed the number of people in the room. Of course, the spirit stepped forward and sprinkled his glitter all over the table. How was Tim at the festivities? Cratchit's wife asked quietly, as the other children helped their brother out of his hat and coat. As good as gold and better, was the equally quiet response. He is such a thoughtful child. He told me that he hopes people saw him today with his monitor and were reminded that the goddess gives her love and magic to us all. Such fond smiles filled both parents' faces that it made Abenzia's heart ache. "Spirit," Abenzia said quietly, "tell me if Tim will live." "I see a monitor, empty of magic, hanging on a wall," the spirit said. "I see an empty place at the table. If these shadows remain unaltered, the child will meet his star time." "No, spirit, say it is not so." "If they are going to die, they should get on and do it and decrease the surplus population," the spirit said, tone as cold as Abenzia had heard it. She looked away as her own words were used to scold her. When she lifted her head again, they were in yet another place. She knew the tree she was looking at with its beautiful carvings and many windows, all spilling with colourful light. It had been Franny's home, and because she had never married, when she had died, it had passed to her son, Freddie. Abenzia had made sure Freddie had people to take care of him, but she had refused to set foot in the home since her sister's death. "I cannot go in," she said. "You must." The spirit led her through the wall, and they rose up to one of the main rooms. Freddie and his husband, a faun that Abenzia knew of but had never met, and several of their guests were dancing merrily as another played a delightful tune on a zither. Everyone else was clapping along and laughing. Abenzia found her foot tapping along despite herself. She remembered it just like this when Franny had been alive, always full of joy and happiness. Thoughts of her beloved sister twisted her heart. After a while, the dancing stopped and the games began, but eventually even fairies and their friends became tired, and everyone sat down with punch. "No Aunt Abenzia this year, Freddie?" someone asked, and everyone else laughed. Even Freddie smiled. Abenzia was insulted. She seemed to be a running joke. "I have no patience with her," Freddie's husband said, to much agreement. "I have," Freddie said. "I feel sorry for her. She hoards magic, and what good does it do her? She does not use it. She does not feel the joy of giving it to those in need. She is alone and miserable, and yet she cannot see it. Her crimes are their own punishment." "But, no," Freddie held up his hand. "It is Midwinter Festival. I will not talk of these things now. It is time to celebrate." "Well said," someone else chimed in. Abenzia was left just staring. When she looked at the spirit beside her, she realized that his hair was going white in places. "Do you age, spirit?" she found herself asking. "My life on this plane is short," the spirit told her. "It ends tonight." "Tonight?" Abenzia asked and glanced out the window, where it was definitely dark. "Come," the spirit said, and they were once again out in the snow. The path between the trees was dark and empty. As they walked, Abenzia saw a tiny twisted hand slip from between the spirit's robes. "What is that?" she asked, stopping and stepping away. "Forgive me," she said, as she realized she may have given offense. The spirit parted his outer robe, and beneath were two twisted sprites, one deep red with huge yellow eyes, the other blue with pale slits. "Are they yours?" "They are all beings," the spirit replied, hair now as white as snow. "They cling to me, for I am hope. The red one is ignorance, the blue want. Beware them both, but beware the red more. Deny it when you find it, for it brings doom." "How?" There was the tinkling of bells, and chimes began to sound. Before her eyes the spirit began to fade. "Wait, please do not leave me here." "Beware," was all the spirit said as he disappeared. Merry Midwinter, The Magic of the Season, Chapter 3, by Natasha Duncan Drake. The forest was dark here. Life was sleeping under the snow, and Abenzia was alone. Only as she turned did she see something that chilled her blood. This phantom floated, just like the first, but it had very little form. It gave off its own light, glowing red around a hood that was so dark Abenzia could see nothing within. "Am I addressing the ghost of midwinter yet to come?" she asked, even as her voice shook. The spirit inclined its hood, just a little. "Lead on, spirit," she said. "Lead on." By now she was used to the sudden change in scene as soon as she touched the spirit's robes, but she did not recognize the back corner of lawn, even in the bright light of day. "Come in," said a voice from the shadows, and a faun carrying a bundle entered the dwelling beside them. The spirit floated towards the entrance as well, and Abenzia almost shied back as the door slammed in their faces. In an instant she had forgotten they were not corporeal. Inside was dark and dingy, and a woman in a long black robe sat behind a big desk. "She's gone then," the woman said. "Passed over in the small hours," the faun replied. "What do you have?" she asked. As the faun stepped forward, Abenzia realized he was carrying a sack, which she dumped on the table. The woman stood, pushing the sack open and looking in. "Magic storage jewels," the woman said, stepping back. "You stole magic?" "I would never," the faun defended himself. "They're empty. She had them lying around. They're the expensive kind, the only thing she willingly bartered for the best." The woman stepped back to the table, reaching in and pulling out one of what was inside. Abenzia recognized it immediately. She had many of the things herself. They still looked impressive, even when empty. "Well, you get points for being industrious," the woman said and smiled. "Let's haggle." The spirit floated backwards, the scene in front of them fading out before Abenzia could hear any more. This time they appeared in a busy street, with people hurrying back and forth. "I hear the witch met her time," the pixie beside a stool said. "I heard that too," the owner of the stall replied. "Can't believe she's finally gone. It's going to be an even bigger celebration this year when the news spreads." "You can say that again." Before Abenzia could even take the scene in, it was gone again. Now they were standing in front of a bed. The details were indistinct, and she could not see anything of the room around them, but what was very clear were the scorch marks on the linen. "That looks bad," a voice said, and Abenzia turned to see a sprite looking at the burns as well. "No one here," the gnome with him said. "Bad way to go," the sprite said. "Well, if she had been kinder to those around her, there would have been someone here to help her cross, wouldn't there?" the gnome said. "Serves her right." "No one deserves that," the sprite said. "She did." "Please, spirit," Abenzia begged. "I understand. This being could be me. It is the path I am on, but I beg you, show me some emotion associated with this death." The scene changed again. "Did she relent?" a dryad asked as her human partner walked up to her. He shook his head. "Then we must run," she said. "To give the magic in your soul would kill you. And I cannot." She rubbed her belly, which Abenzia realized was swelling. "No, my love," the man said. "We will not run." "But—" "She is dead, love. Her time finally came." "So who—" "I don't know," the man said. "But they cannot possibly be as bad as her. We are saved." The dryad began to cry. "Goddess, forgive me," she said, "but I feel joy." "Spirit, no, please." Something wholesome, please, show me something, Abenzia begged. Again the scene changed. She recognised the Cratchit house this time, but not the scene inside it. There were no smiles, no laughter, only tired eyes that had clearly seen weeping. Your father should be home by now, Mrs. Cratchit said, a tremor in her voice. I think he has walked a little slower these past few days, the elder son said. He told me he finds it harder without Tim singing to hasten his step. As do we all, Mrs. Cratchit agreed. But we must be strong for him. All the children nodded. As if on cue, the door from the stairwell opened and Cratchit walked in. He looked pale, thin and tired, but he raised a smile for his family. Ah, my dear ones, he said, it gladdens my heart that you are all here. I wish you had all been with me, for I have found the perfect plot for Tim's marker. Just as we promised him, he will always be able to look down and see how much we love him. There were tears in many rebellious eyes, Abenzia could tell. There were tears in her own. Now, we must not be sad, Cratchit said, walking over and scooping his whole family into his arms. Tim would want us to sing and give thanks. It is midwinter, and although he tried so hard, he could not stay with us to celebrate it. Our Tim is a star, and he will never be in pain again. May the goddess bless us one and all, one of the girls said very quietly. Abenzia could watch no more. She turned away as her tears fell. It was long moments before she realised there were no more voices, and she finally looked up. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw where they were. It was one of the marker clearings. All around her were tiny memorials to those who had passed beyond the mortal plane. The spirit had materialised her, right in the middle. She was standing on them, not even on the wooden walkways specially placed above them. The spirit had no hands, but part of its amorphous robe was pointing at one particular stone. Abenzia did not dare look. Please, spirit, she begged. It did not move. I cannot look. The spirit floated towards her. I cannot, she begged, but it did not relent. Without her consent, her head began to turn. She closed her eyes, but her traitorous lids would not stay shut. Even as she desperately fought, she could not fail to see the small, mostly plain, but carefully carved stone. There in even lettering was her own name. No, she cried, please, spirit, tell me these shadows may be changed. I understand. I will right my wrongs, please. She threw herself at the spirit, and it burned. Was this starfire? Was this how she would die? Even so she held on, desperately, begging all the while, until she realised it no longer burned, and it felt like very real cloth. Very slowly she opened her eyes. She was lying on the floor, clinging to her carpet. Light was shining through her window, which was as tight shut as she remembered leaving it before any of the visits the night before. Abenzia could not help herself. She laughed. A most peculiar feeling fluttered in her heart. It took her several seconds to realise it was joy. She could hear music, singing, and bells, and she hurried to the window, throwing it open. The air was filled with perfume and the smoke of incense fires. It was midwinter's morning, of that there was no doubt. Merry midwinter, she called down to two people passing below. They both looked up and waved, calling back their own greeting. There was that fluttery feeling again. She could not believe how wonderful it felt. Come on, Abenzia, she said to herself. We have work to do. Firstly, she found her most joyful clothes. Not really very joyful, and she made a mental note to rectify that as soon as the holidays were over, but she did her best. Then she went to her storage area and found the finest bottle of festive spirit she had. It was very fine indeed, having been a tribute, and she had never opened it because it was too good to waste. She penned a quick letter to Freddie, thanking him for his invitation, and telling him that she would love to accept and that she would be there in the afternoon in time for dinner. The bottle was for Freddie and his husband to enjoy as they wished, and she would be bringing proper gifts later. Then Abenzia filled a sack with everything of reasonable size and value to hand that she could use for barter, and headed for the nearest merchant district. Along the way, she hired a young dryad to take the letter and the bottle to Freddie's for her. She bought gifts and food and had them all packaged and sent, some to Freddie, some to Cratchit. At which point she headed for her gathering place. She threw open the door, not bothering to close it behind her, and all but ran into her office. With both hands she took hold of the screen in front of the magic crystals and pulled. It came away with a delightful ripping sound that made her laugh. Magic sparkled at her, almost as if it knew what she intended to do. Taking the biggest jewel, she walked over to the wall and placed a hand flat against it. Holding the jewel against her heart with the other, she willed the power to flow through her. It leapt from its confinement, dancing down her nerves and into the tree she was touching. In her mind's eye she could see it as it flowed and spread. Where it touched, ice sparkled and snow glistened. All around her, to the very edges of her district, everything was renewed. Joy burst through her heart. When she was finally finished, she turned to find she was no longer alone. The door to her gathering place was filled with people. "Merry Midwinter," she said, laughing and letting the crystal drop from her hand. Now empty, with not even the tiny amount of magic left to maintain it, it shattered into 1,000 pieces, each one vanishing in a tiny spark. All those watching her looked shell-shocked and unable to comprehend what was going on. "Merry Midwinter," said a very young voice, and Abenzia looked down to see a tiny gnome child smiling at her. She smiled back and laughed. "Everything will change," she promised, "but now I have things I must do." She picked up 2 more of the crystals, leaving the many others on full display, and actually hopped out the window. As she had hoped, as she hurried into the medical district, she saw the 2 beings who had visited her the day before. They had to have a specialist on hand for what they wished to do, and she had taken a guess as to who it might be. She hurried up to them just as they were approaching the correct establishment. "Majestic fellows," she greeted, using the old forms. "I must apologize for my behavior yesterday. Please accept this for your cause." She gave them one of the crystals, and she thought the fawn's eyes might pop out of his head for a moment. This is, he said. "Barely adequate," she told him, "but it will have to do. Merry Midwinter to you both." The fawn gaped at her, but the dryad smiled. "Merry Midwinter, majestic Abenzia," she said with a small bow. Abenzia touched her heart and bowed back. "Please excuse me," she said, "but I have a very urgent matter to attend to." "Of course," the dryad said. Abenzia hurried off for the other reason she had come to the medical district. 2 hours later she knocked on Cratchit's door. "Mistress Abenzia," Cratchit said as soon as he answered, "this is a surprise." She smiled even as he tried and failed to lie. "Probably not a good one," she said and smiled. The shock on his face was priceless. "But I wish it could be," she went on. "Please, call me Ebby. I have had the most amazing experience, Cratchit, and I see how wrong I have been. I do not wish to intrude, but I have something I did not think could wait. This," she said, handing over the box she was holding in her hand, is for Tim. It should keep him safe until we can get him to the best physicians to put him to rights. Cratchit's eyes were huge and round, even for a pixie, and he opened the box reverently. Inside was the most advanced monitor available, far better than the one Cratchit and his family had been able to get. Such things were available for those in need, but Abenzia had gone to the best to get the best. "Who is it, love?" came from inside. "Oh." Abenzia looked in to see Mrs. Cratchit on the stairs, looking worried. Cratchit simply held out the box he was holding. "For Tim," he said. Mrs. Cratchit gasped. "And now I shall leave you to your midwinter feast," Abenzia said, and turned to go. "That was you as well," came from Mrs. Cratchit. It was not a question, but Abenzia nodded anyway. "I cannot make up for who I have been," she said, "but I promise I will, from this day, be the best I can possibly be." "That is all anyone can ask," said a small voice from the stairs. Tim was smiling at her. "You must come in," Cratchit said, grabbing her arm. "But I do not wish to intrude." "Nonsense," Mrs. Cratchit said, and Abenzia made a mental note to find out her name very soon. "Yes," Tim agreed. It seemed there was no getting away, and Abenzia found herself at the centre of 2 midwinter celebrations in the same day, as she made merry with the Cratchits and with her nephew. It was the best midwinter she could ever remember. After that she was good to her word too. Not one of those in her district went wanting, be it magic or anything else. Abenzia became famous for her generosity and kindness, and how well she kept the midwinter festival each and every year. Thank you for joining me and helping me celebrate my birthday with an homage to a favourite of mine. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. It would make me very happy if you would like this video if you enjoyed it, and please consider subscribing. Don't forget the bell icon either, so YouTube will let you know about all new vids. Thank you. It really helps us out with the algorithm deities. Also, if you would be so kind, drop me a comment to let me know your favourite genres so that I can be sure to include them. As always, if you enjoyed today's vid and would like a copy of the story to keep, there is an ebook version on Amazon and all the other major retailers. There is a link in the description, or scan the QR code on screen now. See you Monday for the next short. As always, we'll have 4 YouTube shorts on Monday to Thursday and another longer video on Friday. And now, as promised, the cute kitties. They're beginning to talk about contracts. Anyone know the exchange rate between cat treats to pounds? See you next week.